Welcome to the Point. In Lansing, the legislature is poised to be on pause for the next 2 weeks after an active session that saw action on repealing the 1931 abortion law, repealing right to work, reinstating prevailing wage provisions, expanding the state's Civil Rights Act, and working on gun control bills that would create background checks, red flag laws, and storage rules for firearms. All in all, it's been a couple of months of Democrats acting unilaterally in many cases to enact long-ignored priorities for their party. There is still a lot of work to do for the legislature when they return, including putting together a budget which could prove easier than some years, given the state surplus, and potentially more difficult, given that Republicans may not be in the mood to compromise, and the majority may need some of their votes to get across the finish line. That's all yet to come. For the next 3 weeks, we'll take a look back and forward at what some House members think about the session so far and what they're working on, beginning with Kalamazoo area Representative Democrat Julie Rogers, who has reintroduced a bill aimed at BB gun safety and is continuing her work on the health care front. Representative, let's talk about this legislative session. It certainly is a different feel from almost every avenue, and for you, it's a real opportunity to compare. You served in the minority. Now Democrats are in the majority in the House and in the Senate, and obviously have all of the constitutional offices. Give me your take on, I was joking with you before and said I'm not going to ask you which side you like the best, because clearly being in the majority is preferable, but how does it feel different for you in this session?
Sure. Well, I would say I had the similar experience as a county commissioner. So my very first term as a county commissioner, I served in the minority, and then we flipped in Kalamazoo and became majority. And honestly, a lot of Michiganders, we're a purple state, so we really need to govern in the middle. There's a lot of bipartisan things that I intend to work on collaboratively. For example, lead poisoning. It affects a lot of our families and children in many communities. Flint, of course, was the bellwether city, but my own community has lead poisoning, for example. So I'm thrilled to hold a gavel. I'm thrilled to chair Health Policy Committee, which is my wheelhouse and what I know best. But honestly, once we get past these, the first 6 that were on our checklist, I think there's going to be a lot of bipartisan work to be done.
How do you do that? How do you reel that back in? Because, and I don't mean to suggest for a moment that you, as Democrats in the minority, didn't feel some of that same type of push of, never mind, we'll do this on our own. But that's what the first part of this session has been, almost unanimously. I mean, if you look at right to work, if you look at prevailing wage, even in the gun bills, I think there was only one of those 11 bills that got a handful of Republican votes, and that was gun storage. One provision of gun storage. I think it was for the tax part of that. But the idea is that in the first 2 months, Republicans have been essentially shut out. And again, I'm not suggesting this is something new that hasn't happened in the past, but when you come back from spring break and when the budget items get started, where I suggest you will need Republican votes, because I don't think you can keep 56 Democrats together on every budget bill, how do you kind of rebuild that connection, or do you have to?
Sure. Well, I want to start by saying I really appreciate the 8 Republicans that did vote with us on ELCRA. Elliott Larson's Civil Rights Act is long overdue for expansion, and so that was a huge bipartisan win. And I will say, as being in the minority, it did teach me that to get any of my bills across the finish line, I needed to reach out and be collaborative. And so again, I worked on a sexual assault prevention and education package with more Republicans on that 8-bill package than Democrats last session. I'm the lone person returning, either House members termed out or went over to the Senate, so I'm taking up that as another one that I think will be bipartisan and hopefully get across the finish line this year. And I think that there's several Republicans that understand their role. There are some that don't. And some of them reached out to me right away the day after the election and said, let's work on some of these bipartisan common sense things for Michiganders. So I'm starting there with people, that treated me fairly and that already reached out and want to work together.
Talk to me about being chair of health policy a little bit, because you and I discussed this over in the Capitol shortly after that happened, but it dawns on me we haven't discussed it on the show. That is not insignificant because it deals, as you said, with lead pipe issues, but it is much broader than that and has a big impact. And you come from the healthcare background, so I mean, it's kind of an interesting fit for you.
Yes, I'm very excited. There hasn't been a person with a background for a number of years in the health industry, and so I'm very excited. As a practicing physical therapist, I still practice a couple days a month, and so that work and that experience and my patient experiences inform a lot of what I do. And it's actually one of the pieces I think that with even gun safety legislation in Kalamazoo County several years ago, we declared gun violence as a public health crisis, and we see it in the hospitals and in the healthcare workers that treat and rehab the people that are survivors of gunshot wounds are also a part of this community problem.
When you think about the things that may be coming before your committee and you know the makeup of your committee, one thing to get through the committee and another thing to get through the full body. So as your first time as committee chair, and I appreciate the fact that you do have your county board experience too, but as a first time committee chair, how challenging is that to balance what the committee wants to do with what perhaps leadership wants to do?
Well, I think, again, it kind of comes down to a bipartisan approach. And so I've already met with Minority Vice Chair Vanderwall several times. He and I have a good working relationship from being co-chairs of the Art and Culture Caucus as well. And so seeing what makes sense, where we can compromise, that C word that's sometimes rare in Lansing, and then knowing that you do need 56 votes to get something across the finish line. And so on either side, you can lose a couple people. And having a bipartisan approach in committee, I think, sometimes paves the way to get something through the full House.
When you just take stock of this as we get into the spring break period of time, and when you come back, do you anticipate the pace to be a little more, and I hate to use this word, but more regular order? I mean, there have been some things that have kind of moved quickly. There have been some things that have gone to conference and changed pretty quickly. Is it going to become more like the regular session, particularly given that you do have all that budget work that has to be done?
Well, I have quickly learned not to make predictions in Lansing because you are usually wrong. So I have been very proud to be a part of this breakneck pace, but I think my staff will say that they're ready for a more measured, regular approach, as you will. But I don't make predictions in this town anymore.
And that may be the most politic answer that I've ever heard. I think that's a good idea. Don't make predictions. Let's talk about something that we won't predict, but something that we know you're doing. You are reintroducing, and I assume it's largely the same language, a bill that would, and I'll explain it, and if I get it wrong, you'll correct me. It would require adult supervision when minor children are using BB guns. And I don't want this in any way to be misconstrued or confused with the gun legislation that has already been passed in some measure. But this is something separate and different, and it stems from a real life incident in your district.
Yes, so it wasn't in my district exactly, but Kalamazoo County. A young man named Devin Free, who is a 12-year-old boy, was shot in the head approximately a year and a half ago now with a BB gun by another underage minor. And he did survive the initial impact of that, but did pass away, unfortunately, about a year after the initial incident. His family and neighbors, of course, were devastated, and they are looking for legislation to help with these kinds of situations. When I met with the family after introducing my bill last year, they were very appreciative of us uplifting it and said really what their concern is, while Devin's life cannot be replaced, they want this to be prevented in the future. And so again, we are not trying to take anyone's guns away. We are just saying that, you know, probably children under 18 don't have the cognitive capacity or judgment skills yet, as their brains are forming, to be responsible with BB guns. I've also heard people ask me about BB guns and why this is necessary, and what I really believe is that they've gotten more dangerous over the years. So this is not the proverbial movie back in time of, I'll shoot your eye out
Right.
type of thing. These are much more serious guns with a lot more impact than they ever had before. And so I think we need to uplift, number one, the seriousness of this, and number two, that's the reason for the legislation, is requiring that adult supervision piece.
The idea that these guns are different, and to give a little lay viewpoint on that, you have some of these that are actually battery powered. You have some that can be considerably more powerful if they are air powered. There are still some of the old fashioned Red Riders out there, I guess, that you can still actually use like the old BB gun. But in all cases, they fire a projectile through one of those mechanisms, and that projectile in and of itself can be dangerous, if not fatal, in a lot of ways. So I guess the question is, let's say you get this passed and you explain and people understand, how do you impress upon people to do it? Because it's not like you're going to have an enforcement mechanism. You're not going to be able to follow people around. So what kind of a public awareness campaign goes along with this?
Sure. So I think first, just introducing legislation, there's usually a buzz around that. So just the act of introducing legislation can sometimes uplift an issue. The family of Devin Free already said that they were appreciative of me introducing it last year. They recognized that there might be some challenges in the former legislature with getting a committee hearing, for example, but really were appreciative of me just doing the bill so that we could have conversations like this with media. I certainly intend to uplift it on my own social media as well, and then potentially partnering with law enforcement and potentially schools to really get the word out and share that adults need to be explaining to children, for sure, not to be aiming at anyone's head when they're using these, and basically that BB guns are not toys.
When we come back, a freshman Republican will join us next to talk about changes to security, even as the democratically controlled legislature has passed a number of gun bills in the last 2 months. That's next. To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. Early on in this session, Representative Gina Johnsen, a Republican who represents part of Kent, Ionia, Berry, and Eaton counties, joined us to express concerns over some of the gun legislation that Democrats had introduced. With those bills largely dealt with, she talked with us about other solutions she would like to pursue, particularly when it comes to safety and security. Representative, when we first talked after the election, it was not long after the shootings at MSU, and at that time, you had talked about your concerns about being a gun-free zone and feeling like that left people vulnerable. And you have now come up, and to be clear, this is a very different and separate set of bills dealing with guns and the way they can be used than the ones that Democrats have already passed. As we talk, they're not final. We know they will be finalized at some point. And those had to do with red flag laws, those had to do with gun storage, and those had to do with background checks. So I'm just making a very clear line that these are different bills. These are bills that you have been working on. Tell me about what you would like to see when it comes to gun legislation.
What I'd like to see is, again, the goal being met. The goal for all of us is to keep people safe, especially our children. We're parents, we're mothers, we're fathers, aunts and uncles, grandparents, and we have our own safety to take into consideration. If we're really going to look at the true goal, which is safe communities, safe schools, safe neighborhoods, that we're all feeling as safe as we can, we do need to follow the laws we already have, which have largely not happened. And this, especially these recent school shootings and situations we've been in. And I'd like to propose that we form a work group or several work groups, taking everyone into consideration, everyone at the table. That means law enforcement, schools and administrators, teachers, parents, mental health world, the medical establishment, and community groups, social community groups. When they all come to the table, when we've seen this done in the past, and it has taken time, and it has been a transparent, open discussion, all-inclusive process, we have come to really good, definitive solutions. And we've seen this in the state of Michigan. Several years back, they spent a year with 3 work groups figuring out how to be energy efficient, how to reach our goals with the best use of funds, and that was just energy. This is actually saving lives, which is so much more important. And if we get distracted by a political narrative that just sounds good, feels good, we ram it through, get it through quickly without transparent, open discussion, including all the parameters that are needed, we're not going to reach our goals. We're not going to feel safer. We're not going to have safe communities. We're just going to have a lot of new legislation that is definitely going to take away Second Amendment rights, but more than that, it's not going to reach the goal. That's what I would like to see happen, some definitive work groups established.
Obviously, you have some things you'd like to see done. I mean, it's not that you start from zero when it comes to what you think should be done to get to gun safety. What are some of the specifics you'd like to discuss?
Definitely, we need more, in my opinion, we need more administration and more security at our schools. We need more at the university and primary, secondary level schools. We need mental health completely reevaluated. To say that the system is broken is an understatement. We don't have anywhere near enough treatment options. We've taken away some in years past. We need to bring them all back, and we need to get the experts in that field to the table. We are short psychiatrists, social workers, etc. And it's a little ironic that the same party that wanted to defund the police now wants, 11, 12, however many new laws, and only the police are going to be able to enforce them, and we're short police. So we've got a lot of different angles of a problem here. Again, mental health, security at the points where we have gun-free zones, which I do not agree with. I think they're an invitation to more gun crime. They stop people from being able to defend themselves. As a woman, that's very important to me. We're out here walking around in Lansing after dark many nights when we're working late, and so is our staff. And we have to defend ourselves if a problem occurs. There's security around, but we don't know if they're available, if they're right there. And when you look at the statistics of even something like in Illinois, 80% of the deputies say they're not enforcing the red flag laws they have. This is not an answer. We've got to find out what are the real answers. Law enforcement knows what they're capable of doing with the staff they have, and what is realistic. Is it realistic that they're going to really go to someone's house that someone raised a red flag concern about, and they're going to go take their guns from them? Most cops that you talk to, they'd say, I do not want to be doing that. We already have a shortage of police. How are we going to get more police on the police force when we're forcing them to do things that are, New York State says it's unconstitutional. They have to reverse all the red flag laws just 90 days ago. That's unrealistic that we're going to then introduce red flag laws here and find out they're unconstitutional. We need to slow down. We need to really evaluate this transparently in a public forum and with everybody included at the table. And I think they're just rushing, the leadership is rushing through legislation that's not going to be effective.
Well, we know that the Democrats' leadership has been on a real fast track with any number of things, including gun legislation. As you and I talk, we're just on the verge of a couple of weeks off, spring break, maybe a cooling off period. And there's going to be a reckoning at some moment because budgets have to get done. And it occurs to me as a longtime observer that holding 56 Democrats, the bare minimum that you have to pass something in the House, together on some really core Democratic ideas may be one thing. But getting 56 Democrats to all stay in line on budget items when each individual member has needs and wants in their own area, it's not likely you can make everybody happy. So is it possible that as the budget process gets started, that there may be people willing to look in a more collaborative effort and have some kind of discussion like this. I guess the question wrapped up in that is, when session resumes after spring break, assuming that those big items that Democrats wanted to get done early on have already been pushed to the governor, is it your belief or hope that things fall in more regular order and you have an opportunity to have some of these conversations?
It's always my hope. But you know, good leadership brings about bipartisan cooperation. Good leadership is not afraid of having the entire discussion on all of these big items. Why would we rush through things that are the most important things that affect our state, our economy, our safe schools, the education success? Why would we ever rush through anything? Good leadership's never afraid of a healthy debate, discussion, and everyone coming to the table. But it looks like out of fear maybe, and maybe that's what you're suggesting, they're rushing everything through, meeting spring break, now you have what you want, and now we can sit down and calmly discuss the budget? That doesn't follow. It's my hope, but when you have sabotaged the state's most important issues, how do you then calm down and come to the table and everything's now going to be transparent and open discussion? We got some real fundamental problems here in process, and it is not normal. It is not a good standard that we don't have equal participation. There's now inequities across the state, and we've got to change this going forward somehow.
We're just about out of time, and in total transparency, you have to get back into session, even though this will air well past that. But one final thing that you dealt with in session earlier today, and that was the grading of school systems A through F. You spoke to that on the floor. Give me your take.
Well, first of all, we've got a lot more problems that can be addressed in this one little piece of legislation. But when you take away a oversight process and you have nothing to replace it with, I understand that there were problems with it. There's problems with a lot of aspects of our educational system, and I don't really like the state dictating to all the local districts how to do things when they might know better. But my problem with it was they didn't offer an alternative, and the amendment, they haven't taken any of our amendments, but to have an amendment where you offer resources to the struggling students that have never recovered from the COVID-19 shutdown, why would we not do that? That makes no sense to me. We have to rush the resources, the people, finances where necessary, whatever's needed to get these students back on track.
When we come back, what's next for the legislature? To the point. One of the must-do items for the legislature this spring will be putting together a budget. Republicans are already leery that Democrats may follow the governor's recommendations too closely. And you'll hear one GOP member talk about that right here next week. To the point.